By the time you finished reading that sentence, the version of you that began it was already gone. Not in some poetic way, in a measurable, almost embarrassing way. The light reaching your eyes left its source a fraction of a second ago. The signals climbing your nerves arrive late. The self you call now is a quiet reconstruction, stitched together by a brain that has never, not once, met the present moment directly. So here is the strange thought, the one that won't quite settle once you've heard it. If you are always slightly behind the world, always meeting a moment that has already passed, then in some soft, unsettling sense, the you reading this might already be over, and something else, something almost identical, is taking its place. Welcome in, settle into wherever you are. If these slow late-night wanderings feel like home, the gentle thing is to subscribe so the next one finds you. And for people like us, the minds that don't quite switch off, there is a quieter conversation continuing in the quiet room on Patreon. The link rests in the description. It is where the threads the algorithm tends to bury keep unraveling, where the deeper undercurrent of these questions is allowed to breathe. Tonight, we drift through that strange suspicion. Not as fear, as wonder, the body, the mind, the universe, and what might already be happening beneath the surface of being you. Imagine you're reaching for a cup of tea on the small table beside you. Your hand moves, the cup lifts, the warmth meets your fingers. It feels instant, seamless, as if the world and your awareness of it are happening in the same breath. But that smoothness is a kind of beautiful illusion. By the time you actually feel the cup has already been touched. The signal had to travel, the brain had to catch up. Light reaches your eyes. Then your visual system needs roughly 1/10 of a second, sometimes more, to assemble what you are seeing into a coherent picture. Sound travels through the ear, gets translated, then arrives in conscious experience a small delay later. Touch climbs the nerves from your fingertips to your spinal cord, then upward to the brain in another quiet handful of milliseconds. Each sense runs on its own slightly different schedule, and yet, somehow, you experience all of it as one unified, smooth, present moment. That smoothness is something the brain manufactures. It collects these slightly mismatched signals, holds them for a brief instant, and then releases them into awareness as if they had arrived together. Researchers sometimes describe this as the brain's binding of experience, gathering scattered timings and stitching them into a single felt now. It is a small miracle of editing. The price of that editing is delay. The reward is the feeling of being here. So when you sit quietly and think, this is the present moment, what you are really experiencing is a carefully assembled echo, a few hundred milliseconds of reality, already finished, finally arriving in consciousness like light from a nearby star. Some have described it as living one heart behind the world. Others, more gently, as riding just behind the wave. Either way, the implication is curious. The you that feels present is, in a sense, slightly historical. A small, soft ghost of the body that has already moved, and here is where the suspicion deepens. If the present you experience is always a reconstruction, then it is always being made, always being rebuilt. There is no fixed, frozen moment where you are simply you. There is only the ongoing act of becoming you, again and again, several times a second. Most of the time, this delay is invisible. It hides behind the seamless flow of life. But occasionally, you catch a glimpse of it. The strange feeling when a video is slightly out of sync with its sound, and your brain stubbornly tries to glue them back together. The odd lag between seeing lightning and hearing thunder, where the brain quietly accepts that one sense is ahead of the other. These are tiny windows into the truth that all of perception, even the most ordinary, is happening on a small delay. The world out there is always a step ahead of the world in here. It is a humble thought, almost tender. The self you call yours has been listening, gently, to a present moment that has already passed. And somehow in that listening, something extraordinary keeps happening. You feel alive. You feel here, even though in the strictest sense, you are always meeting the world a little late. While you have been settling into this slow rhythm, somewhere inside you, around now, Several million of your cells have quietly ended. Not with drama, not with pain, just a soft folding inward, a kind of orderly bow. And then they are gone, replaced, recycled, forgotten by the very body that made them. This happens all the time, every second of every day. Estimates suggest that something on the order of 50 to 70 billion cells in your body end themselves each day through a process scientists call apoptosis, a Greek-rooted word that essentially means falling away, like leaves dropping from a tree. It is the body's gentle built-in choreography of letting go. Cells that are damaged, no longer needed, or simply finished with their role receive a quiet internal signal and they dissolve. Think about that for a moment. While you are sitting here, calm, breathing slowly, something inside you is constantly ending, constantly being replaced. The skin on your hands, the lining of your stomach, the tiny cells in your eyes that turn light into vision. They are not the same ones you had a few weeks ago. In a strange, almost dreamlike way, your body is always halfway through becoming someone new. And here is the part that often goes unnoticed. This isn't damage. This is design. Apoptosis is not the body failing. It is the body succeeding. Without it, you wouldn't have fingers. The webbing between embryonic fingers disappears precisely because those cells quietly end on schedule. Without it, you would be overwhelmed by old, malfunctioning cells. The body's quiet endings are what allow the larger life to continue. So inside you, right now, there is a soft, ongoing rehearsal of ending. Trillions of small disappearances every year, all of them invisible to you, all of them necessary. Some have wondered, late at night, where the line is between these small cellular endings and the larger ending we tend to call death. If parts of you are always ending, always falling away unnoticed, then perhaps what we call the end is not a single moment, but the accumulation of countless quiet ones, a long, slow farewell that has been happening since you were born, and yet you feel continuous. You feel like one person. The story holds together. That, in itself, is the wonder. Somewhere beneath your awareness, a vast biological orchestra is constantly losing players and finding new ones, and still the music plays. Still the song sounds like you. It reframes something we usually fear. Endings, in this view, are not the opposite of life. They are stitched through it, threaded into every breath. The body has been practicing them, gently, since long before you ever noticed. Maybe that is part of why we sleep so peacefully, when we sleep well. The body knows this rhythm. The body has always known. Cells fold away, new ones rise to take their place, and a quiet renewal moves through you in the dark. So if the thought that you might already be ending feels unsettling at first, the body offers a softer answer. Endings, it seems, are not enemies. They are how something living keeps being made, and tonight that quiet rehearsal continues inside you, gentle as breath, faithful as tide. If you place a hand softly over your chest, you can usually feel it, that steady, patient rhythm, the heart doing what it has done since long before you had a name. Most of us imagine it as a metronome, a perfect, unwavering beat, ticking out the seconds of a life. But the truth is stranger, and somehow more beautiful. The heart does not actually beat in a perfectly even rhythm. Between each contraction, there is a small pause, a quiet moment where the muscle relaxes, the chambers refill, and in a sense, nothing is happening. Electrically, mechanically, there is a brief stillness, a small dark interval where the heart is, for an instant, not beating at all. In healthy hearts, this pause varies, slightly longer when you breathe out, slightly shorter when you breathe in. This subtle variation has a name in physiology: heart rate variability. It is considered in many studies a sign of a healthy, responsive nervous system. The heart that pauses with a little flexibility is the heart that is most alive. The perfectly rigid metronome, by contrast, often signals stress or illness. So here is the quiet wonder. The thing that keeps you alive is not a relentless, uninterrupted pounding. It is a rhythm built entirely out of beats and pauses, motion and stillness, presence and small absences. The pauses are not failures, they are the music. Now soften the thought a little further. Inside the heart itself, there is a small cluster of cells, sometimes called the sinoatrial node, that acts as a natural pacemaker. These cells generate the electrical signal that tells the rest of the heart when to contract. They are, in a sense, the conductor of your inner orchestra, and they fire in waves, tiny pulses of voltage rippling through the muscle, organizing all those individual cells into a single coordinated motion. Between each pulse, there is a moment of electrical silence, a reset, a breath. Your heart in that brief gap is gathering itself before speaking again. Some have wondered what it means to be alive in those tiny pauses. Not dead, of course, not anything dramatic, but not quite in motion either. A small, silent interval inside the larger flow. Multiplied across a lifetime, those pauses add up to many hours of stillness inside your chest, hours during which you were, by the strictest physical measure, briefly between beats, and yet you would never feel it. The pauses are too short, too smooth, too woven into the rhythm. The brain doesn't register them. The body keeps going. Perhaps this is part of why the heart has always felt like a kind of poetry. It is not a machine. It is a rhythm of presence and absence working together, a long, patient dance between motion and rest, repeated billions of times. When you lie quietly at night, your heart slows. The pauses lengthen gently as the body relaxes. In those longer intervals, there is something almost contemplative happening inside your chest. The heart is resting between its own words, the way you rest between thoughts. And here, perhaps, is the soft wonder. Even the most relentless thing inside you knows how to pause, knows how to be still, knows that being alive is not the absence of stillness, but its companion. If you let your attention drift gently to your breathing, you might notice something subtle. It is not as constant as it feels. Sometimes the breath flows in, deep and slow, sometimes it is barely a whisper. And every now and then, especially as you slide towards sleep, the breath simply pauses, a small, soft hesitation, a moment when the body forgets, just briefly, to inhale. Most people never notice. The pause is brief, the next breath comes, and the rhythm continues as if nothing happened. But these tiny pauses are happening, gently, more often than we tend to realize, especially in the descent into deeper sleep. In the brainstem, there is a region quietly responsible for keeping you breathing. Researchers often describe it as a small cluster of neurons that generate the rhythm of respiration almost automatically, like a soft drumbeat in the basement of the brain. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to remember. While you are reading, while you are dreaming, while you are entirely lost in thought, that small drum keeps beating, in and out, but it is not a rigid drum. It listens, it adjusts, it pauses. In the borderlands of sleep, especially in lighter stages, the breath can hesitate, sometimes for a second or two, sometimes longer. These brief hesitations are, in mild forms, a normal part of human sleep. The body softens, the brainstem relaxes, and the breath, like everything else, takes its own small rest. Here is the gentle strangeness. While you are asleep, you are in a sense half trusting your body to keep going on its own. You don't supervise it. You don't decide when to inhale. You simply hand the rhythm over to something deeper than thought, and you let it carry you through the night. And it does. Almost always it does. Some have wondered what it means that the most essential thing about us, this continuous taking in of the world, is governed by a region of the brain we cannot consciously touch. You did not choose to start breathing. You will not choose to stop. The breath belongs, in a sense, to a part of you that knows things you do not. Now consider how thin the membrane is between being awake and not. Each breath is an exchange. Air comes in, mixes with blood, becomes part of you for a moment, then leaves again, carrying with it small traces of who you were. The boundary between you and the world is not solid. It is porous, gentle, and constantly shifting. If you sit quietly with that idea, the breath begins to feel less like something you do, and more like something passing through you. You are not the breath. You are the place where the breath happens. That is a soft, almost relieving thought. The work of being alive is not entirely yours. Something larger, older, more rhythmic is doing much of it on your behalf. You are simply along for the ride, watching the air move in and out, marveling at the fact that it does. And in the small pauses, the brief hesitations, the body does not panic. It waits. It trusts. The next breath always comes. In a way, learning to sleep well is learning to let those pauses happen without fear. Learning that small moments of stillness are not endings, only the spaces between the music. The breath, like the heart, has always known how to rest. There is a small moment each morning just after waking when you are not quite sure who you are. It lasts only a second or two. The body is still half in sleep, the dream is still drifting in the air, and the mind is reaching for the familiar story of you. Then gently it returns. Your name, your life, the room, the day. The self clicks back into place, and you go about your morning as if nothing strange happened, but something strange did happen. For that brief instant, the story was not there. And then it was. Memory, it turns out, is not a recording. It is a reconstruction. Each time you remember something, your brain does not press play on a stored video. It rebuilds the memory piece by piece from scattered fragments distributed across many regions. A part of the brain called the hippocampus plays a key role in this stitching, especially for memories of personal events. It acts a little like an index, finding the relevant pieces and weaving them together into a coherent scene. And every time you remember, the memory is gently rewritten, slightly altered, slightly shaped by the mood you are in, the new information you have, the person you have become. Researchers sometimes describe this as memory reconsolidation, a process in which the act of recalling something opens it up to subtle change before it is stored again. In other words, your past is not a fixed library, it is a quiet, ongoing edit. So consider the self that wakes each morning. It does not arrive whole, it assembles itself from yesterday's fragments, the dream's residue, the body's signals, the brain's quiet retrieval of you. It pulls together your name, your face, your story, and only then do you feel continuous. Only then do you feel like the same person who fell asleep. Some have wondered, softly, whether the person who wakes is really the same as the one who slept. Most of the body has continued through the night, of course. The heart, the breath, the slow rhythms of the cells. But the conscious self, the felt sense of being you, vanished for hours. And in the morning, it was rebuilt. If memory is what makes you feel continuous, and memory is being rewritten each time it is used, then the continuity you feel may be more like a beautifully crafted story than a fixed object. A long, gentle narrative the brain tells itself, again and again, to keep the sense of a single self alive. This is not a sad thought. It is, in a way, a tender one. You are not a frozen statue. You are a long, evolving story, retold each morning, edited gently by experience, and the brain, the hippocampus, the quiet machinery of memory, has been doing this for you every night of your life, without applause, without acknowledgement, patiently rebuilding the person you call yourself, so that when you open your eyes, the world feels familiar. Sleep, in this view, becomes something quite remarkable. Not a small death, not even a pause. It is a workshop, a nightly atelier, in which the self is gently disassembled, examined, softened and reassembled before dawn. So when you next drift towards sleep, there is no need for fear. You are simply handing the story over to the part of you that knows how to retell it, and trusting that, by morning, you will be returned. There is a small experiment you can do tonight. If you happen to pass a mirror before bed, stand for a moment in front of it. Look at the face there, and ask yourself gently, who is that? You will, of course, say your own name. The recognition is fast, almost automatic. But if you pause a little longer, something subtle may surface. The face in the mirror is not exactly the one you carry in your mind. It is slightly different, slightly older, slightly less familiar than the inner image you have of yourself. And yet, you know it is you, Somehow, this small mismatch is more interesting than it seems. Neuroscientists who study what they sometimes call the bodily self, or the self model, have shown that the brain constructs a continuous sense of "this is me, this is my body" from many sources: vision, touch, balance, the inner sense of your body's position, the feedback of your muscles. All of it is integrated into a soft, ongoing simulation of being a self inside a body, and this simulation can be gently tricked. In simple experiments, when people watch a fake rubber hand being stroked at the same time as their hidden real hand, many begin to feel, after a moment, that the rubber hand is theirs. The brain integrates the visual and tactile signals and quietly extends the boundary of the self. The borders of me turn out to be more flexible than we tend to assume. So when you stand before the mirror, your brain is doing something quite remarkable. It is seeing a face out there, recognizing it as part of you, and weaving that outer image back into the inner sense of self. The mirror image and the felt body do not naturally match. They are stitched together by a brain that is willing to bridge the gap. Some have wondered where exactly the self lives during all this. It is not in the mirror, clearly. The face there is just light reflecting off glass. But it is not entirely in the body either. The body is a collection of cells, organs, fluids, signals. None of those on their own feels like you. The self seems to live somewhere in the relationship between body and brain. In the soft model the brain is constantly building, and if that model is constructed, then it can also shift. People who have lost limbs sometimes still feel them, sometimes for years. People who have certain neurological conditions can feel that parts of their body are not theirs, even when they clearly are. The self, in all its certainty, turns out to be a quiet, ongoing negotiation between signals. This is the gentle strangeness the chapter has been circling around. The body forgets to notice itself most of the time. The delay, the cellular endings, the pauses in heart and breath, the nightly rebuilding of memory, the flexible boundary of the self in the mirror, all of these point towards something soft, almost unsettling, almost freeing. You are not a fixed thing. You are a continuous happening, and somewhere beneath all of it, the body keeps doing its quiet work, pumping, breathing, replacing, remembering, without your supervision, without your applause. Tonight, as you lie still and let these thoughts drift, you are not asking the body to keep you alive. You are simply noticing that, gently, it already is. Somewhere in an old photograph, there is a younger version of you, maybe a small child, holding a toy, squinting at the camera, maybe a teenager, awkward, unsure, half-grown. You can look at that picture and feel a strange thing. You know that was you, and you know it isn't anymore. The face is similar, the name is the same. The story you tell about your life connects you to that child, but almost nothing else has stayed. Cells across most tissues of your body have been replaced many times since then. Skin cells turn over in weeks, the lining of your stomach in days, bone is gradually rebuilt over years. Researchers studying cellular turnover have suggested that, depending on the tissue, large portions of your body's material have been quietly exchanged for new material since childhood. The atoms that make you up today came mostly from food, water, and air you took in long after that photograph was taken. In other words, the child in the picture is, in a very real sense, no longer here. Now soften that thought. It does not mean that child is lost. It means the child has been quietly translated, atom by atom, into the person sitting here tonight. The body you live in now is not the same body that played in that yard or sat in that classroom. It is something new, built from the leftovers of meals and breaths and seasons. The continuity is not in the matter. The continuity is in the pattern. Even the brain, often imagined as more stable, has been rewiring itself the whole time. Connections between neurons strengthen, weaken, dissolve, and form anew throughout life. Some neurons themselves are replaced in certain regions. The web of associations that makes up your inner world is constantly being reknit. The thoughts you had as a child, the way you understood the world, the small fears, the small joys, most of them have been rewritten or quietly forgotten. And yet, when you look at that photograph, something inside you says, That was me. Some have wondered what we are pointing to when we say that. Not the body, clearly. Not the brain in its specific configuration. Perhaps a pattern, a long, slow shape that the matter has been arranging itself into. The way a river is, the same river, even though the water is always different. If that is true, then you have already lived through several quiet endings without noticing. The toddler ended, the child ended, the teenager ended. Each version of you dissolved gently into the next, atoms moving on, neurons rewiring, memories softening. And here you are, the latest expression of a long, ongoing translation. This reframes something we tend to fear. The idea of an ending suddenly feels less foreign. We have crossed many already. Each one was, in its own small way, a kind of becoming. Tonight, as you settle into stillness, there is a softness in this thought. You are not a single fixed self trying to hold on against time. You are a long, slow unfolding. The endings you have already passed did not destroy you. They simply made room for the version of you that is here now, listening to these words, breathing gently in the quiet. The child in the photograph is still in there somewhere, just no longer separate, folded gently into the pattern that you have become. There is a peculiar honesty in the way sleep arrives. You don't really decide when it happens. You can prepare for it, lie down for it, invite it, but the moment of actually falling asleep is not something you are awake for. You are there, and then you are not, and you only know you slept because you wake up later, surprised that time has passed. This is, when you think about it, a strange daily experience. Every night, the felt sense of being you simply turns off for long stretches, especially in the deepest stages of non-REM sleep. There is no inner voice, no awareness of the room, no story of the self, just darkness. Then morning, researchers studying the brain during deep sleep have observed something interesting. A network of regions sometimes called the default mode network, which tends to be active when we are awake and lost in thought about ourselves, quiets down dramatically during deep sleep. The brain regions associated with the inner narrative of me slow their chatter. The self, in a measurable sense, fades, and yet the body continues. The heart beats, the lungs breathe, the cells repair, the metabolism hums along. Life goes on quietly, without the witness who usually claims it. Some have wondered what to make of this. Every night you are absent from yourself for hours, not unconscious in some dangerous way, simply, gently, gone from the felt center of being you, and every morning you return, as if it were nothing, as if it had not happened. If you have ever feared the idea of not being, it is worth sitting with this. You have already had thousands of nights of practice. You have already crossed, again and again, into a state where the inner self softens, dissolves, becomes barely a flicker, and it has always been fine, every time. You came back. The world was still there. You picked up the story where you left it. In a way, sleep is a small, regular rehearsal of letting go, a nightly demonstration that the self can recede deeply and completely, without the universe ending. The body knows how to do it. The brain knows how to do it. It is in some sense one of the most natural things you do. Some contemplative traditions have noticed this quiet truth for a long time. They have pointed out gently that the fear we sometimes have around endings is interesting given that we already passed through something not unlike a small ending every night, not dramatic, not painful, just a soft setting down of the self into a deeper rhythm. When you next drift towards sleep, you might notice the moments just before you lose awareness. The thoughts grow softer, the boundaries of the body blur, the sense of being a specific you begins to thin, and then you are not there to notice anymore. There is no struggle in it. The mind simply releases its grip. The self lets go gently, and what remains is something deeper than self. The breath, the body, the quiet of the room, and whatever it is that continues without needing a name. In this small disappearance there is a kind of trust, a trust the body has been practicing for as long as you have been alive. And tonight that trust is available again, soft as a long exhale, waiting for you to lean into it. Imagine for a moment Someone lying on a hospital bed, about to undergo surgery. A doctor speaks gently, asks them to count backward from 10. They begin 10, 9, 8, and then suddenly they are in a different room, a different light, with a different feeling in the body. Hours have passed. They feel as though no time has occurred at all. This is the strange country of general anesthesia, and it is one of the quietest, most unsettling clues we have about the nature of consciousness. In ordinary sleep, even deep sleep, the brain is still doing many things. Dreams happen, memories consolidate, time, while subjective, still has some shape. In anesthesia, something different occurs. The drugs used in modern anesthesia interrupt the brain's ability to integrate information across its different regions. The communication that seems to underlie our normal sense of being a unified, aware self is gently switched off. There is no dreaming, no inner monologue, no sense of waiting. For the person under anesthesia, time does not pass slowly. It does not pass at all. The witness, in a sense, simply isn't there. One theoretical framework in neuroscience, sometimes called integrated information theory, suggests that consciousness arises when many parts of the brain share information with one another in a richly interconnected way. When that sharing breaks down, when the brain's network becomes more fragmented, consciousness fades. The theory remains debated and still evolving, but it offers a soft, suggestive idea. Maybe being aware is not about having a particular kind of brain cell. Maybe it is about the way information flows. If that is even partially true, then consciousness might be more like a song than an object, a pattern of activity, a particular kind of dance. When the dance is interrupted, the song stops. When the dance resumes, the song begins again. This is a strange and gentle thought. Under anesthesia, there is no you experiencing the absence. There is just absence. And then suddenly you again, the continuity of the self, which feels so solid, can be paused and resumed, and the resumed version does not feel any gap. Some have wondered, softly, what this implies about endings in general. If consciousness can be interrupted so cleanly, if the witness can disappear entirely and then return as if nothing happened, what does that suggest about the larger transitions we cannot easily study? This is where the chapter steps carefully. We do not need to claim more than the evidence allows. What we can say is gentle. The conscious self appears to depend on certain kinds of activity in the brain. When that activity is disrupted, the self fades. When it returns, the self returns. The connection between awareness and the brain's pattern of communication seems intimate, even if its full nature remains one of the deepest open questions in science. Some philosophers and scientists go further and propose that consciousness might be more fundamental than we currently understand, perhaps something that flickers wherever the right kind of pattern exists. Others suggest it might be entirely a product of the brain's specific architecture. Both possibilities remain open. Both invite humility. Anesthesia, in this sense, becomes a quiet teacher. It reminds us that we already know what it is like for the self to vanish without distress, and it gently widens the question of what consciousness is and how much we still do not understand about the witness inside us. There is something unusual about the way you experience your own body. It feels solid. It feels here. It feels like a place you live in, fixed and obvious, but the body you feel is not a direct reading of your tissues. It is a model, a continuous prediction the brain is making about what your body should be doing, where it should be, and what it should feel like. Researchers in cognitive science have been gathering, over the last few decades, a quietly remarkable picture of how this works. The brain does not simply react to incoming signals, it predicts them. It guesses ahead of time what the next sensations will be, and then compares those guesses to what actually arrives. When the guess matches, you experience smoothness. When the guess is off, you notice surprise. This framework, sometimes called predictive processing, suggests that perception is much more like an active, ongoing simulation than a passive recording. Now apply that to your own body. Right now, the brain is predicting the weight of your limbs against the surface beneath you, the pressure of your clothes, the slight movement of your chest as you breathe. It is forecasting the very sensations that, a moment later, will arrive in conscious experience. And those forecasts shape what you feel. This means, in a soft and strange sense, you are always living slightly in the future of your own body. The body you feel is the body the brain expects in the next instant, gently corrected by the signals coming in. You are always meeting a version of yourself that has not quite arrived. That is a curious thought to hold. When you reach for something, the brain has already predicted how your arm will feel as it moves, how the object will feel when you touch it, how your fingers will close. Most of that prediction happens before the action is complete. The smoothness of being you is built out of these tiny forecasts, layered together into a seamless flow. Some have wondered what this implies for the felt sense of being here. If the brain is always guessing the body slightly ahead of itself, then the body you experience is always a kind of forward shadow, a best estimate, a draft of the next moment. In conditions where this prediction system goes awry, the experience of the body can change dramatically. People may feel that parts of themselves are not their own, or that the world has become strangely flat or unreal. These conditions remind us that the felt body is constructed, not simply received. And yet, in ordinary life, the predictions are so accurate, so seamless that you never notice them. The body feels obvious, the world feels solid, the self feels here. But behind that obviousness, the brain is doing extraordinary work, weaving forecasts and feedback together into the simple, gentle experience of sitting still in a quiet room. Tonight, as you lie in your own quiet room, you might let this thought settle softly. The body you feel is not exactly the body that exists. It is the body the brain is dreaming, moment by moment, just slightly ahead of itself. And the version of you reading this is, in some sense, always meeting itself a half step into the future. That is not a frightening thought. It is a strangely intimate one. The mind is endlessly attentive to the body, endlessly anticipating it, endlessly imagining your next breath, your next stillness, your next gentle settling into rest. Across many cultures, many centuries, and many medical contexts, people who have come very close to death and then returned have sometimes described unusual experiences, a sense of peace, a feeling of moving through a tunnel or toward a kind of light, the sensation of looking down at the body from a distance, a review of the life in vivid, compressed scenes. These reports are not universal, and they vary widely from person to person, but certain themes appear often enough to have caught the attention of researchers. It is worth approaching these accounts gently. They are neither proof of any particular afterlife, nor are they easy to dismiss. They are something more interesting. They are data, reports from the very edge of human experience, gathered from people whose brains and bodies were in extraordinary states. Studies of these experiences, sometimes called near-death experiences, have explored several possible contributing factors: changes in cortical oxygen levels during cardiac arrest, surges of certain neurotransmitters, alterations in the temporal lobe, the natural protective responses of the brain under extreme stress. Some researchers have observed that in the moments just before clinical death, the brain can show unexpected bursts of coherent activity, patterns of communication that in some studies look unusually rich. What this means is genuinely open. One possible explanation is that the brain, under those extreme conditions, generates particularly vivid, meaningful experiences as a kind of final flourish. Another possibility, more speculative, is that these experiences reflect something we do not yet fully understand about consciousness in such states. Researchers continue to study them carefully, and there is no settled conclusion. What is striking is the consistency in certain themes. Across very different cultures and belief systems, people often describe a softening of fear, a sense that whatever was happening was not, in itself, terrifying. Many return with a quieter relationship to mortality, sometimes even a gentler relationship to life. Some have wondered what to make of that. If the brain, in its most extreme moment, tends to produce a sense of peace rather than terror, that says something interesting about the brain, about us, about the way our nervous system, in its deepest crisis, seems to lean toward calm rather than panic. That alone is a small wonder. It does not resolve the larger question of what, if anything, lies beyond. That question remains open, and the honest answer is that we do not know. What near-death reports offer, instead, is a glimpse into the borderlands, the strange territory where the usual boundaries of self and time and body seem to soften. Whether those borderlands are entirely inside the brain, or whether they touch something larger, no one can say with certainty. Many traditions, religious and philosophical, have intuited that something continues beyond what we ordinarily perceive. Many scientists, working from different starting points, have argued strongly that current evidence does not support such ideas. Both perspectives can be held with respect. The honest stance is the humble one. There is much we do not know. What seems clear is that these accounts deserve to be listened to without rush, not as proof, not as dismissal, but as one more thread in the long human conversation about endings and what they might be. And in the quiet of tonight, it can be enough to simply notice that conversation, to hold it gently, to let it widen the room of possibility without demanding any answer. There is a small, surprising fact tucked away in medical history. The definition of death has changed over the centuries, not in some symbolic, philosophical sense, in an actual, practical, written-down sense. The line we draw to say this person has now ended has been redrawn more than once, as our understanding of the body has deepened. For most of human history, the test was simple. If the breath stopped and the heart stopped, the person was considered to have died. That seemed clear enough. Then, in the 20th century, technologies emerged that could keep a heart beating and lungs moving long after the brain had ceased meaningful activity. Suddenly, the old definition wasn't quite enough. The body could appear alive by the old measures while something essential had clearly ended. So new definitions emerged. Today, in many medical settings, death is often understood in terms of brain function. The cessation of all clinically detectable activity in the brain, including the brainstem, is widely treated as the relevant threshold. But even that definition has its complexities. Different countries draw the line slightly differently. Different ethical frameworks weigh it differently. In other words, the boundary between life and death is not a single fixed wall. It is a careful, evolving agreement, redrawn as our tools and understanding change. This is more philosophically interesting than it might first appear. If the line itself shifts depending on how we look, then perhaps the line is not a sharp object in nature, but a soft gradient we describe in different ways at different times. There are stages of dying, the slow shutdown of various systems, the fading of certain kinds of brain activity, the cessation of others, the final stilling of the cells. These stages can take minutes, hours, sometimes longer. So when we speak of the moment of death, we are speaking, in many cases, more poetically than precisely. There is a moment we choose to mark, but the underlying process is gradual. Some have wondered, in light of this, what it would mean to think of death less as a wall and more as a horizon. A horizon does not have a precise location. It depends on where you are standing. As you move, it moves. It is not a thing. It is a relationship between the observer and the curve of the earth. Perhaps endings are a little like that. From the outside, we can mark them on a chart. From the inside, the experience may be quite different. The shutting down of awareness may itself be gradual, fragmented, layered. The moment we point to may simply be the moment we, as observers, lose the ability to track what is still happening. This is not a claim that something definitely continues. It is a gentle observation that the threshold we imagine as sharp may, in reality, be more of a slope, a long, soft transition that begins long before we notice and unfolds in ways we still do not fully understand. Throughout this chapter, we have been gathering small endings, each version of you that has already passed, each night you have disappeared into sleep, each interruption of consciousness through anesthesia, each predicted body always a half step out of reach, each report from the borderlands, and now the very definition of the ending itself, shifting beneath our hands. It seems we have been crossing thresholds our whole lives without quite realizing they were thresholds. And perhaps the largest one, when it comes, will not be the sharp wall we sometimes imagine, but another quiet slope, walked gently in the company of everything we have already learned how to release. There is a curious principle that quietly underlies much of modern physics. It is rarely spoken of in everyday life, and yet it shapes the way scientists think about reality at its deepest level. The idea in its simplest form is this: information in physical systems may not be lost. It may be scrambled, hidden, scattered beyond all hope of reading, but in many formulations of physics, it is not destroyed. This idea sits at the heart of long-running debates about black holes, about thermodynamics, about the fundamental laws that govern matter and energy. In quantum theory in its standard form, the equations describing the evolution of a system are time-reversible. In principle, if you knew every detail of the present, you could trace the past from it. The information is, in some abstract sense, conserved. This does not mean we can practically recover it. The information may be smeared so thinly across so many particles, so many tiny interactions, that no instrument we will ever build could read it. But the principle, at the deepest level, suggests something gentle and almost poetic. The universe seems reluctant to truly throw anything away. Now consider softly what a person is. A person is, among many other things, an extraordinarily intricate pattern, a configuration of cells, signals, memories, gestures, words, ways of being. That pattern is encoded in some sense in the physical state of the world. Every breath you take leaves a subtle trace. Every word you speak shapes the air. Every action ripples outward almost imperceptibly into the larger fabric of things. When something ends, in the everyday sense, it is fair to say the pattern has dispersed. The body returns its atoms to the world, the cells dissolve, the brain's specific configuration breaks down. But the principle some physicists hold, with appropriate uncertainty, is that the underlying information about that pattern may not be entirely gone. It may simply be unreadable. Some have wondered, in a more speculative tone, whether this offers a soft scientific echo of an old intuition, the intuition that nothing truly disappears, that what we are in some sense is recorded in the fabric of reality, even if no human eye could ever read the recording. It is important to be careful here. This is not a claim that the principle of information conservation guarantees any particular kind of continuation of the person. It is more honestly a suggestion that the universe, at its deepest levels, may behave in ways that are gentler than the brutal everyday picture of vanishing. Some physicists propose that even in extreme conditions, like the slow evaporation of black holes, the underlying information seems to persist, encoded in subtle correlations. The picture remains debated, and the full story is still being worked out. What seems clear, in a soft and humble way, is that the universe is not as simple as a checklist of objects appearing and disappearing. It is a vast, interwoven network in which patterns leave traces, and traces leave traces, and the boundary between what is still here and what is gone becomes blurrier the closer you look. In that picture, your life is not a small flame quickly snuffed out. It is a pattern that has rippled outward in countless subtle ways. The kind word, the long conversation, the small choice, the breath that warmed the room a fraction of a degree, all of it, in some abstract sense, has joined the larger record. This is not a promise. It is a soft possibility, a quiet thread to hold tonight. The thing you call yourself may be, in ways neither you nor anyone else could ever measure, woven gently into a fabric that does not seem inclined to forget. There is an idea in physics that, when first encountered, sounds almost like science fiction. It is taken seriously by some respected thinkers, debated by others, and treated as one possibility among several by most. It is sometimes called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, and it suggests in its softest form that every time the universe could go in more than one direction, it might in some sense go in all of them. To get a feel for this, imagine a tiny event smaller than anything you can normally perceive, a particle that could spin in two different ways, a small quantum coin flip happening in the depths of matter. In ordinary thinking, we say the particle chooses one outcome, and we observe that one. In this interpretation, the proposal is that both outcomes occur. Reality, in a sense, branches. One version of the world has the particle one way, another version has it the other way, and we, observers entangled with the system, end up in one branch, while another version of us, in some sense, ends up in the other. This is a contested view. Other physicists prefer different interpretations where only one outcome truly happens. The deep question of which view is correct remains one of the most fascinating open problems in modern physics. The honest answer is that we do not know, but let us, just for a moment, sit gently with the possibility. If many worlds, or something like it, were even partially true, then every fork in the path of reality is not a closing of doors, but an opening of them. The version of the universe where one thing happens does not erase the version where something else happens. Both, in a sense, continue. Some have wondered what this might mean for the kinds of endings that haunt us in the quiet hours of the night. In one branch, a person's life takes one shape. In another branch, perhaps, it takes another. The ending in one branch does not necessarily mean an ending in all branches. This is, of course, speculation built on speculation. It is not a guarantee of any kind of survival. It is more like a strange, gentle widening of what reality might allow. What is interesting, however, is that this kind of thinking arises from inside physics itself, not from outside it. It is one of several frames that mathematicians and physicists have offered to make sense of the equations that describe the quantum world. The equations themselves are extraordinarily successful. The interpretation of what they mean is still being worked out. If you set aside whether many worlds is literally true, the deeper lesson may be this. The universe we live in is far stranger than ordinary intuition suggests. The simple picture of a single, fixed, marching reality is one possibility among several taken seriously by careful thinkers. Other possibilities, often deeply counterintuitive, remain open. In that openness, there is room for humility, for wonder, for the quiet sense that the world we know is a thin slice of a much richer mystery, and tonight that mystery is not far away. It is in the very particles that make up your body. The atoms within you behave according to these strange quantum rules, even as you lie still in a quiet room. Whatever interpretation turns out to be closest to truth, the fact that the question is even on the table is a kind of gift. It softens certainty. It widens the space of what might be. You are not standing inside a small, fully understood world. You are sitting at the edge of an immense, unfinished conversation that has been going on for a very long time and shows no sign of ending soon. There is a strong, intuitive sense in everyday life that time flows. The past is gone. The future has not yet happened. Only the present is real. We feel this so deeply that it is almost impossible to imagine otherwise. And yet, when modern physics tries to describe time at its most fundamental level, this intuitive picture begins to soften, sometimes dramatically. In the framework of relativity, developed in the early 20th century, time and space are woven together into a single four-dimensional fabric, sometimes called space-time. Within that framework, time does not behave like an absolute clock ticking everywhere at the same rate. It depends on motion and gravity. A clock moving very fast, or sitting deep in a gravitational field, ticks more slowly compared to another clock far away. These effects are tiny in daily life, but very real, and they have been measured many times. Out of this framework, some physicists and philosophers have proposed a view sometimes called the block universe. It is one possibility among several, and it remains philosophically debated. In this picture, all moments of time, past, present, and future, exist within the four-dimensional structure of space-time, much like all places exist within space. The flow of time in this view is not a feature of the universe itself. It is something that arises in the way conscious beings experience their slice of the larger block. This is, admittedly, a strange picture. It does not fit easily into the gut feeling that the present is uniquely real and the past has truly vanished. But take a moment to consider its quiet implication. If the block universe view holds any truth, then moments of the past have not disappeared. They are simply elsewhere within the structure of space-time. A morning many years ago, a quiet afternoon from childhood, a conversation from long ago. None of these would be erased in any absolute sense. They would still exist in their own region of the four-dimensional fabric, just as London still exists even when you are not there. Some have wondered what this implies for the lives of people who have ended. In the block universe picture, all the moments of their existence still exist. The laughter, the small struggles, the quiet evenings, none of it has been deleted. It is, in a sense, fixed into the structure of reality, no longer in motion, but still woven there. It is important to be careful. The block universe is one interpretation. There are other interpretations of time, including views in which the flow is fundamental. Many serious thinkers hold these alternative views. The honest stance, again, is uncertainty. But what is striking is that even within mainstream physics, time is not the simple flowing river we imagine. It is something stranger, something stretchier, something that depends on the observer and the situation. You might let that sit gently as you lie in the dark. The night you are passing through is not, perhaps, simply moving forward into nothingness. It may be settling into a deeper structure where it remains, in some sense, always available. The quiet moment you are having now, the rhythm of your breath, the soft attention you are giving these words, may not vanish in any absolute way as the clock ticks past. This is, again, possibility, not promise. The universe is still showing us what it is, slowly, patiently, one experiment at a time. What we can say with some confidence is that the everyday picture of now being the only real moment is a useful approximation, not a final truth. Reality, even by the most ordinary scientific standards, is stranger and more layered than that. And inside that strangeness, there is a soft kind of comfort. Nothing simple, nothing certain, just a widening of the space in which to wonder. There is a small, well-known set of experiments in physics that, for over a century, has resisted easy interpretation. They involve light, or electrons, or other quantum particles, passing through tiny slits and forming patterns on a screen. When the experiment is run in one way, the particles behave like waves. When it is run in another way, where their path is being measured, they behave like little particles. Somehow, the act of measuring seems to shape the behavior. This is sometimes summarized as the measurement problem, and it has puzzled and fascinated physicists since the early days of quantum theory. In ordinary life, we think of measurement as a simple matter of looking at something. You measure the length of a table. The table does not change because you measured it, but in the quantum world, the act of observation seems entangled with what is observed in ways that resist the usual separation. Different interpretations of quantum theory handle this differently. Some suggest that quantum systems exist in a superposition of possibilities until they interact with a measuring device, at which point a single outcome becomes definite. Others, including the many worlds view we touched on earlier, suggest that all possibilities continue to exist, just in different branches. Still others propose that observation as such has nothing special about it, and that what matters is interaction with a sufficiently complex environment. What none of the leading interpretations claim, despite some popular misunderstanding, is that the human mind is the unique cause of physical reality. The role of the observer in quantum mechanics is more subtle, and what counts as an observer is itself a matter of debate. Still, there is something worth sitting with in this picture. At the deepest levels of matter, the simple separation we usually assume between an external world out there and an observer in here turns out to be less clean than common sense suggests. The observer and the observed seem, at least in some formulations, to be quietly entangled. Some have wondered what this might suggest about the relationship between consciousness and the universe, not in a sensational sense, not as proof of anything mystical, just as a soft acknowledgement that the simple picture, where mind is a small, separate thing watching a vast, indifferent reality, may be more of a comforting habit than a final truth. Throughout history, contemplative traditions have intuited that the inner world and the outer world are not as separate as they seem. Many of those intuitions arose long before modern science. They emerged from quiet attention to experience, and it is interesting, though by no means conclusive, that modern physics, working from entirely different methods, has arrived at a picture in which the boundary between observer and observed has become subtler than we once assumed. This does not mean any particular belief is correct. It means that the question of how consciousness fits into the physical universe is still very much open. The most honest scientists working on this problem will tell you that they do not yet know how to fully reconcile the inner experience of awareness with the outer descriptions of matter. And in that openness, there is room for quiet wonder. The same universe that produced electrons and galaxies also produced eyes that look up at galaxies, and minds that wonder about electrons. Whether that is coincidence, deep necessity, or something stranger still, is something we do not get to resolve from where we are sitting tonight. What we can do, instead, is hold the question gently. Notice that the simple boundary between you and the world is, at the smallest scales, less crisp than it appears. Allow that to soften the sense of being a small, separate thing in a cold, vast place. The universe may, in some quiet sense, be a great deal more involved with you than your daily intuitions tend to assume. There is a strand of thought lying at the edge where physics meets philosophy that occasionally surfaces in late-night conversations and rarely in textbooks. It suggests very tentatively that the universe itself may behave as something like a vast information processing system, not in the literal sense of a computer made of silicon, but in a deeper, more abstract sense. That at its most fundamental level, the universe is doing something with information, encoding patterns, transforming them, remembering them. This is a speculative idea, and it should be treated as such. Different physicists hold very different views on it. Some find it suggestive, others see it as a metaphor pushed too far. The honest position is that we do not have a settled answer. Still, the seed of the idea comes from real places in modern physics. Information, as we touched on earlier, plays a strange and central role in many physical theories. Black holes, in some formulations, behave in ways that make sense only when their information content is taken seriously. The very laws of thermodynamics which govern heat and entropy can be rewritten in the language of information. There is something about information that seems to be quietly built into the deepest layers of physical reality. If even a soft form of this picture is right, then what we usually think of as the lifeless, indifferent background of the universe may be quietly involved in something more like an ongoing process of computation, or recollection, or unfolding. The cosmos, in this view, would not just be matter blindly arranged. It would be patterns being made, transformed, related to one another in ways that resemble, very loosely, the kind of activity we recognize in minds. Some have wondered whether human awareness might be a small, intricate expression of this larger process. Not the only such expression, not the most important, just one mode in which the universe seems to organize information into a felt experience. This is a thought to handle with care. It is not a proof of any grand cosmic mind. It is not a substitute for any particular spiritual view. It is a quiet, philosophical possibility, a way of seeing in which the deep machinery of the cosmos and the small theatre of conscious experience are not entirely strangers. If you set the speculation aside, you are still left with a remarkable fact. The same universe that arranges itself into stars and galaxies, into oceans and storms, into clouds and crystals, has also arranged itself into beings who can wonder about all of it. That arrangement may be a stunning coincidence, a quiet consequence of certain laws, or something deeper. We do not know. What seems undeniable is that, somehow, the universe has produced something like you, a complex pattern of matter capable of attention, reflection, and meaning. And tonight, that pattern is lying still, gently letting the day soften, gently letting words like these settle in. You are not separate from the universe. You are one of the ways it has become aware of itself, even briefly. Whether that awareness ends fully with the body, whether it folds back into a larger fabric, whether it is something the cosmos quietly preserves, no one can say with certainty. What can be said is that the universe has been, at the very least, deeply patient enough to allow billions of years to pass before this particular awareness emerged, patient enough to let it sit in a quiet room tonight, listening to these words, wondering about its own nature. Whatever the larger story turns out to be, you are not an accident inside it, you are part of it. The universe is not somewhere else, It is here, in the breath, in the heartbeat, in the long, slow listening that you are doing right now. And in that listening, something extraordinary is happening. Even if no one fully understands what it is, if you were asked to point to the place inside you where you actually live, what would you do? Many people instinctively gesture toward their head. A few point toward their chest. But for most of human history, and even today, no one has been able to put a finger on a specific spot and say, this is where the self is. That is not a failure of attention. It seems to be the actual situation. Researchers studying the brain have been searching for many decades for the place that produces consciousness. They have looked at small regions, large networks, deep structures, surface layers. What they have found is striking. There does not appear to be a single central location where awareness happens. Instead, conscious experience seems to emerge from a wide, distributed pattern of communication across many brain areas, all of them talking with one another in coordinated ways. One influential idea, sometimes called the global workspace theory, suggests that consciousness arises when information, processed in various specialized regions, is shared widely enough to become available to the rest of the brain. Awareness, in this view, is less a place and more a kind of broadcast, a particular pattern of integration in which many regions briefly are listening to the same signal at once. If that is even partially right, then the self is not a tiny passenger sitting somewhere inside the brain. It is more like a chorus. Many voices, many regions, each contributing a small part, and out of that combined activity, the experience of being someone emerges. And here is the part that quietly opens the door to wonder. A chorus can change its members. Some voices grow softer over time. New voices join. A chorus is not defined by any single singer, it is defined by the music it makes together. In a similar way, the self may not be a fixed object hidden in the brain. It may be a pattern of activity that depends on how the regions are talking to one another at any given moment. When that pattern changes, the experience of being you changes too. In dreams, in meditation, in moments of deep absorption, in the strange edges of consciousness studied in neuroscience labs, some have wondered what to make of this. If the self is not a single thing but a kind of music, then the question of where it lives may be the wrong question. A song does not live in any particular note. It lives in the relationship between notes, in the unfolding pattern of them across time. This reframes something quite gently. You have been searching, perhaps for years, for a stable, central you, a solid core, a definite location, and the brain itself seems to be quietly telling us, through every study and every careful observation, that there may not be one, not in the way we imagined. Instead, there is a pattern, a way the body sings with itself, a way the brain coordinates its many specialized regions into the felt experience of being a single, continuous person. That is not less than what we hoped for. In a way, it is more. It means the self is not a fragile object that can be cracked. It is an ongoing process, sustained as long as the music plays, and tonight that music is still playing, softly, beneath the surface of your awareness. Each region of the brain is contributing its part, the visual areas quietly registering the dim light, the auditory areas listening to the small sounds in the room, the deeper areas keeping the body steady, the breath slow, the heart calm, all of it woven together into the simple, gentle experience of being you, here, now, listening. You did not have to organize any of it. The chorus knows the song. If you have ever had a dream where you were not quite yourself, you have already met one of the strangest, most casually accepted facts about the human mind. In dreams, the boundaries of identity become curiously soft. You can be a different age, a different sex, a different body. You can be someone who looks nothing like you, doing things you would never do in places that do not exist. And within the dream, none of this feels wrong. It feels simply normal. This is who you are tonight. Then morning comes, and the daytime self snaps back into place. The dream becomes a story you tell, half remembered, slightly embarrassed, slightly amused, and you go back to being the person you have always taken yourself to be. But the dream raises a quiet question. If the felt sense of being you can be replaced so easily every night by other felt senses of being someone else entirely, how solid is the daytime self in the first place? In neuroscience, the dreaming state, especially REM sleep, has been studied extensively. During REM, the brain is highly active in some regions and quieter in others. Areas involved in vivid imagery and emotion are particularly engaged. Areas involved in critical reflection and the strict tracking of personal identity are partly subdued. The brain in dreams is generating an immersive simulation, and the part of you that normally says, "Wait, this is strange," has gently stepped back from the controls. In that loosened state, identity becomes flexible. The self-model that we discussed earlier, the brain's continuous map of "this is me," becomes more malleable. It can take on different shapes. You can be yourself, and yet not quite yourself. You can be both, and neither at the same time. This is not a defect of the dreaming brain. It is one of its most fascinating features. It shows with quiet clarity that the brain has the capacity to construct different selves. The daytime self is not the only setting available. It is simply the most stable one, sustained by waking inputs, social contexts, and the long-running story of your life. Some have wondered whether this hints at something deeper. If the self is more like a costume than a core, then perhaps what we call you is one possible expression of something more flexible underneath. Not a soul exactly, not a fixed essence, but a capacity to wear a particular pattern called this life for a while. It is worth being careful here. None of this proves anything about what does or does not happen at larger transitions of the self. The dream self does not literally survive after the dream. It dissolves at waking. The daytime self gathers its parts again from the body, the room, the schedule, the world. But the looseness itself is interesting. It reminds us that the felt boundary of self is not as fixed as we usually assume. We have all already experienced, many thousands of times, the soft transformation of identity within dreams. It has always returned us safely. In the quiet of tonight, you might let this soften something. The self you are now is one of many selves your brain knows how to construct. The dream selves you have been, the childhood selves you can barely remember, the momentary selves that arise when you are fully absorbed in music, or in a long walk, or in a moment of deep care for someone you love. All of these are versions. All of these are real, in their own way. You are not only the daytime self, you are the larger field in which all these selves arise. And tonight, as sleep approaches, that larger field is preparing, gently, to allow another version, another costume, another night of dreaming to begin. There is something familiar about the way time moves differently depending on how you are feeling. A boring afternoon stretches into a long, slow desert. A wonderful evening with people you love seems to vanish in minutes. A near accident on the road where everything almost went wrong can feel for a strange instant as though time slowed down enough for you to see every detail. This is the inner version of time dilation, and it is more than just a feeling. It reflects something real about how the brain processes the passing of time. Neuroscience suggests that the sense of time is not generated by a single clock in the brain. It is instead distributed across several systems, including some involving the neurotransmitter dopamine. Dopamine signaling helps regulate, among many other things, how the brain marks intervals and tracks the flow of experience. When dopamine activity changes, the felt speed of time can change too. This is partly why time can feel slower in states of intense focus or emotion. The brain is processing more information per second. More details are being noticed, more memories laid down. Looking back, that brief period feels longer because there is more of it to remember. The reverse is also true. In calm, unchanging stretches, the brain processes fewer distinct events, and time can feel as though it has slipped by while you weren't watching. Some have wondered what this implies about moments of extreme transition. Reports from people who have survived near accidents often describe time slowing dramatically. The seconds felt like minutes, the minutes felt like hours. From the outside, the event was brief. From the inside, it was vast. Whether this is purely a matter of memory laid down very densely in a short interval, or something else more complex, is still debated. Either way, it points to a soft, important truth. The amount of time that passes by the clock is not the same as the amount of time that is experienced from inside the moment. This becomes interesting when we think gently about endings. If the inner experience of time can stretch, especially during intense events, then the final moments of a life, however measured externally, might feel internally quite different, not necessarily long, not necessarily short, just not bound to the simple ticking of an outside clock. That is, of course, speculation. No one has been able to report from the inside of such moments with full reliability. The honest stance is humility, but the principle itself, the idea that subjective time and clock time are not the same, is well supported, and it gently invites a softer relationship with what we usually call a short life or a long life. The amount of clock time someone has does not directly determine the amount of inner life they have known. A person living a richly attentive existence may experience more inner time in a year than another who passes decades on a kind of automatic pilot. Some contemplative traditions have pointed at this for a long time. They have suggested that presence, attention, and depth of experience are not measured by external clocks. They have offered practices, in their varied ways, intended to thicken the inner moment, to widen it, to allow more of life to be tasted rather than rushed. You don't need any particular tradition to notice it tonight. You can simply observe gently that this present moment, as you breathe slowly listening to these words, has a thickness to it. It is not the same as a moment of distracted hurry. It is wider, deeper. Something more is fitting into it. And in that wider moment, the question of how much time we have begins to soften. It becomes less a matter of how many minutes remain, and more a matter of how present we are inside the ones we still have. When you describe yourself to someone, what do? You tell a story. You mention where you were born, some things that happened to you, some people who shaped you, some things you care about, a scattering of moments threaded into a narrative that, at least roughly, says, "This is who I am." You probably did not invent that habit. It seems to be a deep part of how humans build a sense of identity. Some philosophers and psychologists have proposed that the self is in important ways a story, not just told to others, but quietly told to ourselves, all the time, in a constant background narration that shapes how we experience our own lives. In neuroscience, the brain regions involved in this self-related processing overlap, interestingly, with the default mode network we touched on earlier. When you are not focused on a specific task, when your mind is wandering, much of what it tends to do is rehearse versions of the self, remembering, anticipating, comparing, telling small inner stories about who you are, who you were, who you might become. This narrative self is powerful. It gives life continuity. Without it, the moments of your day would be a string of disconnected experiences. With it, they become chapters of a single life. But here is the gentle strangeness. The story is being stitched, not received. The brain is choosing which details to include, which to soften, which to forget entirely. Every retelling rewrites it slightly. The you remembered from childhood is partly invented in the present. The you anticipated in the future is partly invented now. If that is so, then the self is not a fixed entity. It is more like a long, evolving novel that is being written in real time by an author who is also one of the characters. Some have wondered what this implies about endings. If the self is a story, then perhaps the question is not so much where does the storyteller go, but what happens to the story. Stories, in human life, do not require the original storyteller to keep telling them. They are passed on, they live in other minds, they influence later events. The kind word a grandmother said decades ago can still be moving through her descendants' choices today, even though she is no longer here to repeat it. The book a writer wrote can keep shaping readers' imaginations long after their hand has stopped moving. A life, in this view, is a story that continues to ripple through the larger story of others, even when the original voice has fallen silent. It is important not to overstate this. It is not a literal continuation of personal consciousness, at least not in any way we can prove. It is more modestly a quiet recognition that the patterns we leave behind in people, in ideas, in tiny everyday choices do not simply vanish when our particular brain stops producing its narrative. Some traditions have emphasized this. They have suggested that the things we contribute, even gently, weave themselves into the larger life of a community, a family, a culture. Other traditions have gone further, proposing that something more essential than the story also persists. Still others suggest the story is all there is, and that may be enough. What is shared across these views is a soft sense that no life is a small, isolated event. Each one is woven into many others. Each one leaves traces in the larger story of the world. Tonight, you might let that idea soften you a little. The story you are quietly telling yourself, the one called you, is also written into the lives of everyone you have touched. The author and the characters are entangled, and the book is much bigger than any single page. Throughout history, in many different traditions, people have sat quietly, sometimes in forests, sometimes in caves, sometimes in small rooms not unlike the one you are in tonight. They sat, they paid attention to their breath, they watched their thoughts arise and fall away, and, over time, many of them reported something curious. The felt sense of being a separate self began to soften. Modern neuroscience has begun, gently and imperfectly, to look into what happens during deep meditation. Studies of experienced practitioners suggest that, during certain kinds of contemplative practice, the activity in the brain's default mode network, the region we keep returning to, tends to quiet down. The constant background narration of the self-story becomes less dominant. The boundary between me and the rest of the world feels less sharp. This is not a mystical claim. It is a measurable shift in brain activity observed across many studies. People who have trained for years in such practices often report that, at moments, the strong sense of a separate central self gives way to something broader, a kind of open awareness in which experience continues, but the I who is having the experience becomes much less prominent. Some have wondered what to make of this. If the strong sense of self can soften through practice, while consciousness itself continues, that suggests something interesting. The self may be one feature of conscious experience, but not the whole of it. There may be a form of awareness that does not require the loud, constant narration of me. This is not a religious claim and not an atheist claim. It is, more carefully, a phenomenological observation, one that has been reported across many traditions and confirmed, in part, by contemporary research. Whether that softer awareness is a glimpse of something deeper about reality, or simply a different mode of brain activity, remains an open question. What seems undeniable is that the wall between being and not being, between self and world, is not as solid as our daily experience suggests. It can be loosened, it can be softened, it can be approached gently through attention. This connects gently to many of the threads we have already gathered. The flexible self of dreams, the fading self of deep sleep, the interrupted self of anesthesia, the malleable boundaries of the body, the chorus model of consciousness, the story self that is more written than fixed. Each of these has suggested in its own quiet way that the felt boundary of you is more porous than it appears. And now contemplative experience offers another small clue. The felt boundary can be approached from the inside. It can be loosened deliberately, and in that loosening, people often report something surprising. Not loss, not fear, but peace. A sense of being held, somehow, in a larger field of awareness that was always there, quietly, beneath the noise of self. This does not prove any particular metaphysical view. It is consistent with several. Different traditions have interpreted the experience very differently, and modern science is still in early days of understanding it. The humble stance is to listen without rushing to conclusions, but the implication for the rest of our journey is gentle. If the strong sense of self can soften without anything being lost, then perhaps the largest softening, the one we sometimes fear, may not be the catastrophe we imagine. Perhaps it is more like the deeper end of a process we have already begun, knowingly or not. Tonight, you do not need to attempt any particular practice. You can simply notice that you are listening, that the listening continues beneath thought, that there is a kind of quiet attention that does not require constant narration of who is doing it. That silence, when you settle into it gently, somehow listens back. There is a softer way to think about what we usually call an ending. It does not require any particular belief. It does not require certainty about what comes next. It only requires a small shift in language. Instead of saying that something ends, we can ask, sometimes, whether it is being translated. Translation, in the everyday sense, means moving something from one form into another. A poem translated from one language to another is not the same as the original. Some things are inevitably lost, but something also continues. The shape of the thought, the cadence, sometimes, a core that somehow survives the change of words. Many natural processes look, when examined closely, more like translations than like simple endings. A log burning in a fire is not destroyed. Its matter becomes heat, light, ash and gas, drifting outward into a world that absorbs them. A leaf falling from a tree is not erased. Its substance becomes soil, then food for other plants, then, eventually, parts of new leaves. The matter is conserved even when the form is not. This is a principle widely supported in physics and chemistry. The basic substance of things, atoms and energy, does not vanish in everyday processes. It transforms. Now consider gently what happens to a person at the largest transition. The body releases its atoms back into the world. Some go into the soil, some into the air, some into the bodies of other living things. Over years and decades, the matter that once made up a life rejoins the larger circulation of matter that has been moving across the earth for billions of years. This is not poetry only. It is also straightforward biology and chemistry. Whatever else may or may not happen, this part of the story is well established. In the language of information theory and thermodynamics, larger processes often involve increasing entropy, a measure of how dispersed and disordered things become. Matter moves toward more spread out arrangements, but within that wider dispersal, patterns can be preserved, copied, or translated into new forms. Information does not always disappear. Sometimes it is simply re-encoded. Some have wondered what this suggests for the pattern we call a person. If the body's atoms are translated back into the world, and the information about us, as we touched on earlier, may not be entirely lost from the universe's fundamental record, then perhaps ending is the wrong word for what occurs. Perhaps translation is closer. It is essential to hold this gently. Saying that endings may resemble translations is not the same as claiming that personal consciousness continues in any specific way. That remains an open question, and no honest scientific account can answer it fully. Different traditions offer different perspectives, and many wise people throughout history have held quite different views. What we can say is that the language of complete vanishing is, even by ordinary physical standards, an overstatement. Nothing about the body, the matter, or possibly the deeper information simply disappears. It changes form, it rejoins the world, it contributes to what comes next. That alone is a quiet reframing of fear. Endings in this view become less like erasing a chalkboard and more like turning a page in a book that is still being written. The page you were on does not exist quite the same way anymore, but the story has not been deleted, it has moved forward. Tonight, you might let this shift soften something. The version of you that is breathing slowly in this dark room is part of a long, continuous translation. Earlier versions have already been translated into the version you are now, and whatever comes later, in whatever form, is part of the same gentle, ongoing process the universe has always been doing, patiently, with everything it makes. If you took a single atom from your body, an atom of carbon, say, sitting somewhere in your bones or your blood, and you could trace its history backward, you would discover a quietly astonishing story. That atom did not begin its life inside you. It came from food you ate. The food came from a plant or an animal. That plant or animal drew its carbon from the air, from the soil, from water that had once been part of countless other living and non-living things. But the story does not stop there. Long before the carbon ever reached the Earth, it was formed somewhere else, in the deep interiors of stars. This is one of the more remarkable findings of modern astrophysics. The heavier elements that make up most of your body, including carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, and many others, were forged in the cores of stars that lived and ended billions of years before our planet existed. When those stars came to the ends of their long lives, they released their contents back into the surrounding space, scattering newly made atoms across vast regions. Over time, some of that material gathered into clouds. Those clouds collapsed into new stars and planets, and eventually, atom by atom, those elements settled into the matter that became our world. So when you sit quietly and feel the steady rhythm of your breath, the atoms of carbon in your lungs, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, are quite literally remnants of ancient stars. They have lived a long, long conversation with the universe before arriving in the particular arrangement we call you. Some have wondered what to make of this. It does not on its own prove anything about consciousness or continuation, but it does change the way we tend to imagine our place in things. We sometimes think of ourselves as small, brief flickers in a much older universe. The chemistry suggests something a little different. We are made of the universe's older material. We are, quite literally, ancient matter arranged into a new pattern. The atoms that now spell out your body have spelled out other things before. They have been part of stars, of nebulae, of oceans, of dinosaurs, in some cases, of forests, of the bodies of ancestors thousands of generations back. They are travelers, briefly settled into the shape of you, and when eventually the shape changes, the atoms will travel onward, into soil, into plants, into the air, into the bodies of beings not yet born. They will continue their long conversation, taking new forms, contributing to new patterns. They have been doing this for an unimaginable stretch of time, and they will keep doing it after we are gone. This is one of the quieter wonders of modern science. The thing you call yourself is composed entirely of material that has had many lives. You are not separate from the universe. You are a configuration of its older matter, briefly arranged into a knot of awareness, briefly able to look at itself. Some have suggested, gently, that this is one of the deepest things any conscious being can notice. The fact that you can feel the breath in your chest at all means that the universe has, in some sense, produced an arrangement of its own substance that has become aware of itself. Tonight, in the quiet, the atoms are still in conversation. The carbon is still being carried by your blood. The iron is still helping to carry oxygen. The whole vast network is moving gently through you. And whatever shape these atoms take after their time with you, they will not be erased. They will simply continue, as they always have, in the long, patient exchange that the universe has been having with itself for as long as it has existed. If you travel through human history, across cultures separated by oceans and centuries, one thing keeps appearing in nearly every place. People have imagined, in many different ways, what might lie beyond the visible world. They have told stories about it, built rituals around it, painted images of it on the walls of caves, whispered it to their children, encoded it into songs. These images and stories are extraordinarily varied. Some imagine other realms, some imagine returnings, some imagine continuations of relationship with those who have gone before, some imagine a final stillness, some imagine cycles. The diversity is striking, and the differences matter. No single picture has been universal, yet something interesting hides inside that diversity. Whatever the specific picture, the persistent presence of such imaginings in every known human culture says something about us, not necessarily about what is true, but certainly about what kind of beings we are. We are creatures who keep wondering, who keep reaching gently toward what we cannot see, who keep refusing somehow to accept that the visible part of life is all of life. Some have asked whether this universal habit is data about reality or data about the mind. The honest answer is probably both. It tells us that the human brain, in nearly all its cultural forms, is drawn toward questions about what continues, that is, at the very least, a fact about our nature, and it leaves open but does not settle whether that drawing toward reflects something deeper than ourselves. It is possible to respect this universal tendency without endorsing any particular tradition. Many thinkers in many disciplines have done so. They have honored the seriousness of these long human conversations without rushing to claim that any one answer is the right one. Some traditions describe these imaginings as glimpses, however imperfect, of a larger truth. Other traditions describe them as natural products of the mind's longing for meaning. Still others say both can be true at once. There is room here for many kinds of humility. What seems unhelpful is dismissal. It would be a small kind of arrogance to assume that thousands of generations of careful human reflection on the deepest questions are all simply mistaken. It would be equally unhelpful to assume that any one tradition has the final word. The wisest stance, perhaps, is to listen to the long conversation, to notice its persistence, to honor the people who have asked these questions throughout history with seriousness, to take their reflections as fellow travelers' notes, rather than as enemies to be argued with. Some have suggested that this universal wondering is one of the marks of being human. Other animals seem aware of life. Many seem aware of relationships. But humans, as far as we can tell, are the ones who consistently ask about what is beyond, and who carry that asking from one generation to the next. In the quiet of tonight, you are part of that long line of askers. You did not invent the question. It came to you gently, as it has come to every human who has ever lain awake in the dark and wondered. You are in good company. The mystery is not yours alone. It has been the quiet companion of countless minds before you, and will be the companion of countless minds after. It does not require resolution to be honored. It simply asks to be held with care, and in that holding something soft happens. The question becomes less an enemy and more a friend, a kind of long, faithful presence, a reminder that you are part of something much larger than your own particular life, even if the shape of that larger thing remains, for now, beyond words. There is a careful place to stand when thinking about the largest questions. It is the place where intellectual honesty and emotional honesty meet. From that place, two truths can be held together without conflict. First, that there are many things about endings and what may lie beyond that cannot at present be proven by any rigorous method. Second, that there are also things that cannot be honestly dismissed. Science, in its current form, is extraordinarily powerful. It has revealed deep truths about the body, the brain, the universe. It has built bridges, cured diseases, sent probes to distant planets. It is one of the greatest achievements of human civilization, and it deserves real respect. But science, as practiced today, also has known limits. It works best on questions that can be tested by repeatable observation. It struggles, by its own admission, with questions that lie outside its methods. The deepest questions, about why there is something rather than nothing, about the ultimate nature of consciousness, about what may or may not lie beyond the measurable, often resist clean experimental answers. Many of the world's most respected scientists are quietly the first to acknowledge this. They distinguish carefully between what their methods can address and what those methods cannot fully reach. They are not closed-minded about the unknown. They are, often, deeply humble about it. At the same time, the long human intuition that something continues, that meaning is real, that the inner life is not a trivial accident, persists across cultures and centuries. That intuition is not proof, but it is also not nothing. It is a deep, persistent feature of human reflection that even careful thinkers find difficult to dismiss entirely. Some have proposed that the wisest position is to hold both honestly, to recognize that science cannot at present settle the largest questions in either direction, to acknowledge that the absence of proof is not the same as proof of absence, to take seriously both the rigor of empirical method and the depth of human intuition. This is a kind of intellectual humility that is not always fashionable, but that may be closer to the truth than either extreme. To say we do not know and the honest answer is to keep listening is not weakness. It is in many ways the strongest stance available to us. given the actual evidence. It allows space for the scientist, the philosopher, the person of faith, and the person who simply wanders quietly at night to share a conversation without needing to defeat one another. Each can offer what they have, each can listen to what the others have to offer, each can hold the larger question gently, knowing that it is too big for any single human mind. Some have wondered whether this kind of openness is itself a form of wisdom. It allows reality to be larger than our current understanding. It allows tomorrow's discoveries to surprise us. It allows the inner intuitions of countless human beings across countless generations to count for something, even when they cannot be neatly proven. In the dark of tonight, you do not have to choose between believing too much and believing too little. You can simply hold the question carefully. You can let the unproven and the undismissible rest side by side in your mind. They are not enemies. They are two sides of the same humility, and from that humility, a quiet relief can rise. You do not have to solve the largest question tonight. You do not have to settle anything finally. The question itself can be a gentle companion, content to walk beside you, asking nothing more than that you let it remain. There is a kind of restlessness that comes from feeling we must know, a pressure to settle things, to arrive at firm conclusions, to draw clean lines around the unknown, especially in late-night moments when the mind keeps turning the same questions over and over. The desire for a definite answer can feel almost physical, but there is also a quieter possibility, the possibility that not knowing, when held gently, can itself become a kind of peace. Researchers studying how the mind handles uncertainty have noticed that humans are often more troubled by ambiguous situations than by clearly bad ones. The mind seems to prefer clarity, even painful clarity, to open-endedness. Uncertainty triggers various subtle alarm signals, as if the mind cannot fully rest until the question is closed. And yet, the deepest questions about existence cannot be closed, at least not by any tool we currently have. They remain genuinely open. They have remained so for thousands of years. The relationship between knowing and not knowing is not a problem to be solved before sleep tonight. It is a feature of being human. Once that is accepted, something interesting happens. The pressure begins to ease. If the largest mysteries cannot be settled, then the requirement to settle them dissolves. We can let them be, we can carry them with us, the way we carry other large things, like the love we have for the people we are closest to, or the awe we feel when we see a sky full of stars. These are not problems we resolve. They are realities we live alongside. Some have suggested that wisdom, in many traditions, is largely the practice of holding open questions without flinching, of standing in front of the great unknown without demanding it shrink, of allowing reality to be larger than the mind's preferred shape of it. In that practice, not knowing transforms. It is no longer an absence, it becomes a kind of presence. The presence of mystery itself. The texture of being part of something vast and not entirely understood. This is a peculiar comfort, but a real one. Many people, after long reflection, report that the moments of greatest peace they have known were not moments of certainty, they were moments of trust. Trust that, whatever the truth turns out to be, it does not require their constant supervision. Trust that the universe has been doing whatever it has been doing for a very long time, and will continue to do so regardless of how many questions any single mind manages to settle tonight. Some have noticed that even bodies can rest more deeply once the mind stops insisting on full answers. The shoulders drop, the breath slows, the need to solve becomes less urgent. Sleep, in many cases, arrives more easily when the mind stops trying to finish what cannot be finished in one evening. This is not resignation. It is not giving up. It is a softer, wiser kind of attention, one that keeps the questions alive, but no longer makes them a burden, one that lets the unknown be a companion rather than an opponent. Tonight, perhaps that comfort is available. Not the comfort of having figured out what comes after, not the comfort of certainty about how much continues, but the comfort of allowing the question to be exactly the size that it is. Vast, real, open, and, somehow, not dangerous. The universe has been carrying this mystery for as long as it has existed. The Earth has been carrying it for billions of years. Every human who has ever lived has carried it in their own way. And tonight, in your own small, quiet room, you are simply one more bearer of it for a little while, before sleep gathers you into its softer, older silence. While the mind has been wandering through these wide questions, something else has been happening, quietly in the background. Your body has been settling. Without instruction, without effort, the breath has likely grown a little slower, the shoulders perhaps a little softer. The small tensions of the day have begun, without your particular permission, to ease. This is one of the kindest things the body knows how to do. When we stop demanding much of it, it begins to repair itself. The branch of the nervous system sometimes called the parasympathetic system, the one associated with calm and recovery, gradually takes the lead. Heart rate slows, digestion deepens, blood vessels relax. The whole inner landscape shifts toward rest. You did not have to make this happen. You only had to allow it. It is worth noticing gently that throughout this entire long wandering, the body has been keeping you safe. The atoms have stayed in their patient places. The heart has kept its quiet rhythm. The breath has continued in and out, even when you forgot it. The brain has continued building the experience of being you, moment by moment, without ever once stepping away from the work. Some have wondered what it means to trust the body in this way. We rarely do while we are busy. We push it. We override its signals. We demand more of it than it can comfortably give, and still, faithfully, it carries us through. Now, in this softer hour, the body is doing what it has always wanted to do. It is letting go of effort. It is gathering itself. It is preparing gently for the deeper rest of sleep. You have spent the last hours considering very large ideas. Endings, beginnings, patterns that may or may not continue. The strange architecture of consciousness, long conversation of the universe with itself. And through all of it, the body has been right here. Steady, calm, patient. It has been listening in its own way. It has been letting the thoughts pass through. It has not needed to follow every one of them. It has simply held the rhythm, held the warmth, held the small, ordinary miracle of being alive in this particular evening. Some have noticed that in moments like this, the body itself seems to teach something the mind sometimes forgets. It teaches that being is not a problem to solve. It teaches that the deepest things often happen without our supervision. It teaches that beneath all the wondering, there is a steady, simple presence that does not require any final answer. Tonight, you can let the body lead. The mind can rest even with its unfinished questions. The body knows how to let go because it has always known how to let go. Every night of your life, it has done this, released, softened, allowed sleep to come. You are safe. You have been safe through this entire conversation. You will be safe through what comes next. Whatever the largest mysteries turn out to be, this moment, this breath, this quiet body resting in a quiet room is gentle and whole. The questions can rest now. The mind can rest. The body has already begun. If you look back across the long arc of your life, you will notice something easy to miss. You have not been one person. You have been many. There was the small child who saw the world for the first time. There was the curious student. There was the version of you in love for the first time. There was the version that lost something dear. There was the version that healed. Each of these felt at the time like you, and each in its way has already passed. You did not mourn them exactly. You simply became the next one. This is something quite extraordinary when you sit with it. Every version of you, the child, the teenager, the younger adult, the person you were just a few years ago, has, in a sense, already ended. The continuity you feel is the soft thread running through them, not the sameness of any particular version. In a quiet way, this is reassuring. You have already moved through many endings. You have already learned, without realizing it, how to let one version of yourself fade gently into the next. The fear we sometimes carry about future transitions is, in part, a fear of something we have already done many times. Some have wondered whether the next great transition, whenever it comes, might be more like one of these smaller passings than we tend to imagine. Less of a wall, more of a softening. Another quiet handing on of the thread from one form to whatever comes next. This is not a claim about what specifically happens. It is, more humbly, a noticing that change of self is something we are already familiar with, that endings of versions are woven through every life, and have never, in your case, meant a true erasure. The thread continues. The story keeps being told. The next version of you, even within the rest of this life, is already on its way. Tomorrow, you will be slightly different from tonight. A few cells will have ended, a few thoughts will have passed, a few small adjustments to the long ongoing translation that is your existence. Tonight, perhaps, you can let go of the idea that you must remain exactly who you are. You have never had to. You have always been gently becoming, and that becoming, soft and continuous, is one of the kindest features of being alive. The self that was never only one is also the self that does not need to fear being only one. It has practice, it has memory of release, it has carried itself through every small dissolution of its earlier forms, and it is still here, listening, breathing, settling into the dark. There is something quietly comforting in the way the universe has behaved, as far as our science can tell, throughout its long history. It does not seem to be in a hurry to destroy what it makes. Atoms last for unimaginable stretches of time. The fundamental constants that allow life appear, remarkably, to be tuned in ways that permit complex structures to emerge. The patterns the universe spins out tend to persist, to spread, to interact, to give rise to further patterns. This is, of course, no guarantee about any particular life. The universe is also a place where stars end, where worlds shift, where everything we know operates within the soft rules of impermanence. But within that impermanence, there is a striking faithfulness. Matter, in its deepest form, is not erased. Energy is conserved across changes. Information, in many physical accounts, may not be truly lost. The universe seems, in some quiet way, to hold what it has produced even as it transforms it. Some have wondered whether this faithfulness extends to the patterns we call lives. We cannot prove that it does in any specific way, but we also cannot prove that it does not. What we can notice is that the universe has not, by its known behaviors, ever shown itself to be careless about the patterns it makes. It rearranges them, it translates them, but it does not appear to simply throw them away. This is not a promise, it is a softer possibility, a way of seeing in which the long, patient story of cosmic conservation may, in ways we have not yet understood, include something kind in its treatment of the patterns called people. It is a possibility we can hold gently without insisting upon it. It does not require any particular belief system. It does not require certainty. It simply allows the deep patterns of physical reality, the things modern science has taught us about how matter and energy and information behave, to whisper a little softness into the corner of the mind that worries about endings. The universe that produced you was not stingy with time. It allowed billions of years to pass before this particular moment, this particular breath, this particular listening, became possible. Something in its long behavior suggests it does not waste what it has worked so patiently to make. What that means for what comes after, no one can say with full confidence. But the larger pattern, the larger faithfulness, is something you can lean into tonight. Not as belief, just as a quiet leaning, a small allowance for the idea that, whatever happens, the universe has been gentle with its patterns for a very long time, and may continue to be so in ways neither science nor any tradition has yet fully described. Tonight, in your own small piece of the cosmos, this is enough. The night has grown deeper, the questions have softened, the body has continued its gentle work of slowing, releasing, settling into the long rhythm of rest. Whatever the largest answers turn out to be, this present moment, this quiet, this warmth, this breath, is whole. You do not need to carry anything further tonight. The wondering can rest where it is. The unfinished questions can stay open, like windows left ajar to let in a soft breeze. They will be there tomorrow if you want them. They do not require attention now. Now, only the breath, only the slow, steady presence of the body, only the quiet of the room around you. Whatever may be true about endings, about continuations, about the strange architecture of consciousness, about the long patience of the universe with the patterns it makes. None of it asks anything of you in this moment. None of it requires you to solve it before sleep. You are allowed to let it all simply be. The mind has wandered through many large rooms tonight. The body has carried the mind faithfully through each one. And now, both can rest. Both can settle into the same soft place, the place where doing ends and being takes over. Some have noticed that this is, perhaps, the most honest taste we have of the deepest peace, the peace of letting the self soften, the peace of not needing to be anything in particular, the peace of being held by something larger than the self, whatever that something turns out to be. Tonight you are held by the bed beneath you, by the air around you, by the long, slow rhythms of the planet turning quietly in the dark, by the patient processes of your own body, which have not failed you once in all this listening, by the long, gentle history of the universe, which has been carrying you in some form for as long as it has existed. There is nothing else to do. There is nothing else to figure out. There is only this slow softening into rest. The breath in, the breath out, the body easing, the mind drifting, the room quiet, the night large and kind. Whatever comes after, in any sense of those words, will arrive when it arrives. You do not need to meet it tonight. You only need to meet this breath, and the next one, and the next. Sleep is gathering itself gently around you. The thoughts grow softer, the boundaries blur. The self begins its nightly easing into the larger quiet it has always known how to enter. You are safe. You have always been safe in this place. The body knows what to do. The mind knows how to release. The night will hold you, as it has held every night before, and whatever lies beyond the edges of all this wondering, it is not, in this moment, asking you for anything. It is simply waiting, with the same patience the universe has always shown, for you to rest. Good night. Drift now. Let the larger quiet have you for a while.